Liam Kensington sat in the back of his limousine, staring blankly out the tinted window as the city lights of London flickered across the glass. Normally, he found comfort in this view, the city that he had helped shape, the empire he had built with relentless ambition. Every luxury hotel, high-end restaurant, and elite club in the skyline was a testament to his success. He was a man who thrived on control, who dictated every aspect of his life with precision. But tonight, he had no control. Tonight, he was getting married. And it wasn't by choice. The command had come directly from his grandfather, Alistair Kensington, a legend in the world of business and one of the most feared and respected men in London. Even at 80 years old, Alistair still held the power to dictate the fate of their family, and Liam was no exception. Marry the girl or lose everything. The words echoed in his mind like a prison sentence. All of this ridiculous charade of a wedding, was because of an ironclad will. His grandfather had decreed that if he didn't marry by the age of 32, he would forfeit his inheritance, including his controlling shares in Kensington Enterprises. And today, on his 32nd birthday, Liam found himself being chauffeured to a wedding he never wanted. His jaw tightened as he clenched his fists. The girl. Liam barely knew anything about her. Her name was Elena Moreau, that was all. She was the daughter of a once wealthy French businessman who had suffered financial ruin. From what little he had heard, her father had made some bad investments, and their family had been on the verge of collapse when Alistair intervened. The deal was simple. Elena's father would be saved from disgrace and financial devastation, but in return, she would have to marry Liam. A business arrangement, a contract sealed with a wedding ring. Liam hated it, every single part of it. And yet, beneath his resentment, a strange curiosity lingered. Who was this woman, this Elena, who had been offered up as collateral in a game of power? Did she despise this as much as he did? The limousine slowed as they approached St. Augustine's Cathedral, an old Victorian church with towering stone pillars and stained glass windows. Even though he wasn't religious, his grandfather had insisted on a traditional ceremony. It was all about appearances, about maintaining the prestige of the Kensington name. With a deep breath, Liam adjusted the cuffs of his tailored black suit and stepped out of the car. His presence immediately drew attention. Guests, reporters, and onlookers turned their heads, whispering as he walked up the steps of the church. The weight of their eyes was suffocating, but Liam was used to it. He had spent his entire life under scrutiny, every action analyzed and dissected. Inside, the grand hall was filled with London's elite, business tycoons, politicians, aristocrats, all seated in elegant rows, waiting for the show to begin. The chandeliers above cast a golden glow over the room, illuminating faces that weren't here to celebrate love, but rather to witness a merger between two powerful families. Liam's expression remained unreadable as he made his way to the altar. He didn't glance at the guests, didn't acknowledge their murmurs. Instead, his gaze remained fixed forward, waiting for this farce to be over. And then, the music started. The heavy wooden doors at the end of the aisle swung open, and for the first time, Liam saw her, Elena Moreau. She stood at the entrance, her figure framed by the light spilling in from outside. For a moment, everything else blurred. The murmurs, the flashing cameras, the weight of expectation. She was breathtaking. Her wedding dress was elegant yet understated, a classic satin gown that draped over her slender frame like liquid silver. Her dark hair was pinned into a sophisticated updo, a few loose strands framing her delicate features. And her eyes, deep brown with hints of amber, held a quiet defiance, as if she refused to be just another pawn in this game. Liam had expected a timid, desperate woman, someone who would cling to him for security, but Elena looked anything but desperate. Her expression was poised, unreadable. She walked with grace, her chin slightly lifted, her posture impeccable. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. If she was broken by the circumstances, she gave no sign. For a split second, Liam felt something unexpected, admiration. Then, as quickly as it came, he pushed the thought away. This was still a transaction. The moment she reached the altar, the priest began speaking. Liam barely listened, his mind elsewhere. Elena stood beside him, her scent, subtle, floral, wafting in the space between them. When the priest asked if he would take her as his wife, Liam didn't hesitate. He wasn't here to resist. He was here to obey. "I do." Then the priest turned to Elena. Liam expected hesitation, a moment of uncertainty, but she surprised him again. "I do." Her voice was soft yet firm, steady without a trace of fear. The words felt final, like a door slamming shut. As the rings were exchanged, as the final vows were spoken, Liam found himself staring at her, not out of duty, but out of something else entirely. The ceremony ended. Applause filled the church. The deal was sealed. But as Liam took Elena's hand, leading her down the aisle as his wife, a thought crept into his mind. Who the hell is this woman? And why did he have a sinking feeling that this marriage wasn't going to be as simple as he had thought? The moment Liam and Elena stepped out of the church, the cold London air greeted them like a sharp slap. Camera flashes erupted in rapid succession, and the murmurs of onlookers blended into a low, buzzing hum. Journalists and photographers crowded behind the barriers, eager to capture the first images of the newlyweds. Liam barely acknowledged them. He had played this game before, dodging the press, putting on a perfectly curated image of the Kensington heir. But tonight, as he held Elena's hand in his, something felt different. She wasn't clinging to him for support. She wasn't overwhelmed or shrinking under the pressure of 1,000 prying eyes. Instead, she stood beside him with the same quiet grace she had displayed at the altar, her fingers resting lightly in his, neither gripping too tightly nor pulling away. It unsettled him. He had expected resentment, maybe even fear. Instead, she was unreadable. Their limousine pulled up to the curb, and the chauffeur opened the door. Without hesitation, Liam guided Elena inside, sliding in beside her. The door shut, muffling the noise of the outside world. Silence stretched between them. The only sound was the faint hum of the engine as the car pulled away from the church. London city lights flashed by outside, but inside, the tension was suffocating. Liam finally exhaled and loosened the black silk tie around his neck. His patience was wearing thin. "Let's drop the act," he said, his voice low, controlled. "There's no need for pretense now." Elena turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. For the first time, he had a full view of her face up close. She was even more beautiful than he had realized. Sharp cheekbones, full lips, and dark, expressive eyes that held an intensity he couldn't quite decipher. "What act?" she asked, her tone calm. Liam let out a humorless chuckle. "The obedient bride routine. The composed, graceful woman who goes along with this marriage like it's an honor instead of a business deal." Elena didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I'm not pretending, Mr. Kensington. I agreed to this arrangement just as you did. If you expect me to cry or beg for your affection, you'll be disappointed." Her words were delivered with such poise, such certainty, that Liam found himself momentarily speechless. He had assumed she would be like the others, women who saw him as a prize, who either feared his power or craved it. But Elena Moreau? She wasn't impressed by him, and that irritated him more than he cared to admit. "Good," he finally said, leaning back against the seat. "At least we understand each other." Elena turned away, gazing out the window. The city passed by in a blur, but inside the limousine, time seemed to slow. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Elena broke the silence. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. Liam arched a brow. "I didn't have much of a choice." "Neither did I." Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of something beneath it, something he couldn't quite name. Curiosity flickered in Liam's chest. He knew why she was here. Her father had all but sold her off in exchange for financial security, but something about her demeanor made him question if she had agreed to this entirely because of family duty. "You don't seem like the type to be forced into something against your will," he remarked, studying her reaction. Elena's lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile. "And yet, here I am." Liam narrowed his eyes. There was something about her, a quiet strength, an unshakable resolve, that made him feel as if he was the one being studied, not the other way around. For the first time since this ridiculous arrangement began, he felt a sliver of intrigue. But before he could press further, the limousine pulled into the grand circular driveway of the Kensington estate. The sprawling mansion loomed ahead, its towering columns and intricate stonework illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. Liam didn't wait for the chauffeur. He pushed the door open and stepped out, turning just in time to see Elena emerging with the same effortless elegance she had carried all night. The staff had been prepared for their arrival. 2 uniformed attendants stood by the entrance, their expressions neutral as they waited to welcome the newlyweds. Liam walked ahead, not bothering to offer his arm. He wasn't here to play the doting husband. Elena followed without a word. As they entered the grand foyer, the soft sound of their footsteps echoed against the marble floors. The chandeliers above cast shimmering reflections on the polished surface. But despite the opulence, the atmosphere was cold. This was not a home. It was a palace, a museum, a monument to power and wealth, but nothing more. Elena's gaze swept over the interior, but she betrayed no emotion, no awe, no intimidation. Liam stole a glance at her, trying to gauge what she was thinking. "You'll have your own wing," he said flatly, breaking the silence. "Your own bedroom, separate from mine. You're free to do as you please as long as you don't embarrass me in public." Elena turned to him, arching a delicate brow. "How generous of you." Her tone was unreadable, but there was a hint of amusement beneath it. Liam exhaled sharply. He was too exhausted for games. "This arrangement benefits both of us. We don't need to pretend it's anything more." Elena studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Agreed. Liam expected relief. Instead, he felt an inexplicable irritation. He had thought she would be eager to please him, desperate for approval like so many others. But she wasn't. She was different. And that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Without another word, he turned and strode toward the staircase, leaving her standing in the middle of his grand, empty house. But as he climbed the steps, a single thought lingered in his mind. Who the hell did I just marry? The silence in the Kensington estate was suffocating. Elena stood motionless in the grand foyer, the echoes of Liam's footsteps fading as he disappeared upstairs. She exhaled slowly. It was done. The vows had been exchanged. The cameras had captured their smiles. Fake, of course. And now she was legally Mrs. Elena Kensington. But the reality of her situation was sinking in. She had married a man who clearly despised every second of this arrangement. And perhaps, if she were being honest, she didn't feel much different. With a small nod to herself, she turned toward the butler who had been standing patiently nearby. He was an older man dressed immaculately in a black suit, his expression unreadable. "Madam," he greeted with a respectful bow, "shall I escort you to your quarters?" Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second. Her quarters. She had been prepared for this marriage, but it still felt strange knowing that she and Liam wouldn't even share a room. Not that she wanted to, but something about it made the entire situation feel even colder, even more transactional. "Yes," she said finally. The butler led her through the grand corridors of the Kensington estate. The mansion was stunning. Towering ceilings, marble floors, priceless art on the walls, but it felt empty, lifeless. They finally reached a set of double doors at the far end of the west wing. The butler opened them, revealing a luxurious suite. The room was spacious with high windows overlooking the Kensington Gardens. The walls were painted in soft shades of cream and gold, and an ornate fireplace sat on one side, its glow casting a warm flicker across the room. Everything about it screamed wealth, and yet it felt nothing like home. The butler bowed. "If you need anything, madam, the staff is at your service." "Thank you," Elena replied, her voice polite but distant. Once the doors closed behind her, she finally allowed herself to breathe. She walked toward the window, pressing her fingers against the cool glass. The night outside was dark, the city beyond the estate distant and unfeeling. This is my life now. Her father had made the deal. Her future had been signed away in exchange for stability, for wealth, for a name that carried power. And she had agreed to it. She knew she could have refused. She could have fought. But there had been something more at stake than just her father's business. Her mother's well-being, her family's dignity, the remnants of a life they had once known. It wasn't just about money. It was about survival. And so, she had said yes. But that didn't mean she would be Liam Kensington's prisoner. Her lips pressed into a firm line. No, she wouldn't be one of those wives. Silent, obedient, desperate for affection. Liam wanted distance? Fine, but she would not be invisible, not in her own life. She turned away from the window and began undoing the delicate pins in her hair, letting the long, dark strands fall past her shoulders. She had expected many things from this night: awkwardness, silence, even resentment. But she hadn't expected the knock on her door. She froze. A part of her thought it was the butler or a maid, perhaps bringing something she had forgotten. But when she opened the door, she found herself staring directly into the piercing blue eyes of Liam Kensington. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Liam leaned against the doorframe, looking every bit the arrogant billionaire that he was. His black suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie slightly loosened, but his expression was unreadable. Elena straightened her spine. "I thought you preferred we keep our distance." Liam's gaze flickered, as if considering his next words carefully. "I do." "Then why are you here?" He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair. "Because it's our wedding night, and as much as I'd love to ignore tradition, the press will expect some kind of public display of unity tomorrow. We need to figure out how we're going to handle this." Elena folded her arms across her chest. "So, you came all the way here just to discuss damage control?" Liam arched a brow. "Did you expect something else?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she quickly masked the reaction. "No," she said smoothly. "But I suppose it's amusing that even on our wedding night, all you can think about is image." Liam's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze. "I don't expect us to pretend we're in love, Elena, but we're going to be in the public eye whether we like it or not. I suggest we figure out how to handle this now, before we both become tabloid headlines for all the wrong reasons." Elena studied him for a long moment. There was a time in her life when she might have feared a man like Liam. His presence was commanding, his confidence unwavering, his power absolute. But now she only saw a man trying to maintain control of a situation he never wanted. And strangely, that made her feel a little less alone. "Fine," she said at last, stepping aside. "Come in then?" Liam looked momentarily surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to invite him in. But he recovered quickly and stepped inside. The room felt smaller with him in it. Liam walked toward the fireplace, his hands in his pockets, his gaze focused on the flames. Elena stayed near the door, watching him. "What exactly do you want from me, Liam?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, without turning around, he said, "I want to know why you agreed to this." Elena's breath hitched slightly. She hadn't expected that, but she refused to let him see her falter. "You already know the answer," she said smoothly. "My father needed help. Your grandfather offered it. For a price." Liam finally turned to face her. "You don't strike me as the type to be forced into something against your will. So tell me, was this your choice? Or was it your father's?" His gaze was sharp, piercing, like he was searching for something deeper. For a moment, Elena considered lying, giving him the answer he expected, but instead she met his gaze head on. "Both," she said softly. Liam's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her honesty. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The fire crackled in the silence, the warmth doing little to ease the tension between them. Finally, Liam let out a slow breath. "Then I suppose we both made a deal with the devil." Elena's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "I suppose we did." And for the first time that night, the distance between them didn't feel quite so vast. The fire crackled softly, casting a golden glow across the lavish room. Elena still stood near the door, arms crossed, eyes locked onto Liam's. The weight of his last words, "Then I suppose we both made a deal with the devil," lingered in the air between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally, Liam exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "This arrangement is going to be harder than I thought." Elena's lips quirked into something between a smirk and a challenge. "Did you expect it to be easy?" Liam let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Number. But I also didn't expect you to be..." He trailed off, searching for the right word. Elena arched a brow. "Difficult? Unpredictable." That surprised her. She had assumed Liam thought of her as nothing more than a pawn, a dutiful, obedient wife he could ignore until their contractual obligation was fulfilled. But unpredictable suggested something more, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. "Well," she said, keeping her voice light, "if you were hoping for a submissive, wide-eyed wife who would worship the ground you walk on, I'm afraid you married the wrong woman." Liam's gaze darkened slightly. "Trust me, Elena. I never expected you to be anything but a fighter." Something in the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just a casual remark, it was recognition. Like he saw something in her that he understood, something that mirrored his own struggle. Elena swallowed, forcing herself to break eye contact. This was dangerous territory, the kind that blurred lines and complicated already tangled emotions. She needed to shift the conversation. "So," she said, moving toward the small bar in the corner of the room, "are we going to strategize how to fool the world into thinking we're a happy couple? Or did you come here just to analyze me like one of your business deals?" Liam smirked. "You make it sound so cold." She grabbed a crystal decanter filled with dark amber liquid and poured herself a glass. "Isn't that exactly what this is?" Liam walked over, taking the glass from her hand before she could lift it to her lips. Elena raised a brow. He studied the drink for a moment, then looked at her. "Do you even like whiskey?" She hesitated. The truth was, not really. But she wasn't about to admit that to Liam Kensington. Instead, she lifted her chin defiantly. "Why? Are you afraid I'll get drunk and embarrass you?" Liam chuckled. "No, I'm afraid you'll drink something you hate just to prove a point." That caught her off guard. His gaze held hers for a beat too long before he finally set the glass down on the bar, untouched. A silence stretched between them, charged and unspoken. Elena suddenly felt like the walls were closing in, the air between them too thick, too intense. She needed space. With a forced smile, she turned toward the bed and grabbed the silk robe draped over the chair. "Well, if this conversation is over, I'd like to get some sleep." Liam didn't move. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he nodded. "Fine. But tomorrow, we have to be seen together. The press is already waiting for any sign of a scandal." Elena gave him a mockingly sweet smile. "Then I'll make sure to wear my best loving wife expression." Liam smirked but didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward the door. Just as he reached for the handle, he paused. Then, without turning around, he said, "Good night, Elena." Elena stared at his back, something tightening in her chest. It was such a simple phrase, normal, expected, meaningless, and yet in that moment it didn't feel meaningless at all. Liam opened the door and stepped out, leaving Elena standing in the middle of the room, heart pounding for reasons she didn't understand. This marriage was supposed to be nothing, but somehow it was already becoming something else entirely. The morning sun filtered through the massive windows of Kensington Estate, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floor. Elena sat at the breakfast table, her fingers curled around a steaming cup of coffee. She hadn't slept well. Her mind had been restless, replaying the conversation with Liam over and over. She had expected tension, maybe even resentment, but she hadn't expected curiosity, and that unsettled her more than anything else. She needed to remind herself why she was here. This marriage wasn't built on love, attraction, or even mutual respect. It was a business arrangement, a means to an end, nothing more. "Madam," a maid said gently, pulling Elena from her thoughts, "Mr. Kensington is waiting for you in the main lounge." Elena arched a brow. "He's awake already." The maid hesitated. "He's been awake for hours." Of course he had. With a sigh, Elena set down her coffee cup and rose to her feet. She smoothed the soft fabric of her dress, a simple yet elegant ivory number that hugged her figure just enough to appear effortlessly sophisticated. She didn't care much about impressing Liam, but she did care about not losing in whatever silent battle they were playing. As she entered the lounge, she found Liam standing near the grand piano, dressed in a crisp navy suit. His tie loosened just slightly, making him look both refined and effortlessly untamed. He turned at the sound of her heels clicking against the floor. "Elena." His voice was even, controlled, but there was something in his gaze, something just beneath the surface, something dangerous. "Liam," she replied, matching his tone. "To what do I owe the honor of this early morning summons?" He gestured toward the small seating area by the window, where a selection of newspapers had been laid out. She frowned, stepping closer, and then she saw it, their faces, plastered across the front pages of multiple tabloids. The marriage deal of the century, Kensington heir and mysterious bride, true love or strategic move. Cold stares, forced smiles, inside the Kensington wedding. Billionaire groom already regretting his choice? Elena exhaled sharply, picking up one of the papers and scanning the article. The paparazzi had been ruthless. Every expression, every glance between her and Liam had been dissected, twisted, spun into a narrative that made them both look like fools. She let out a humorless laugh. "Well, that didn't take long." Liam's jaw tightened. "I told you this would happen." She set the newspaper down, meeting his gaze. "And what do you suggest we do about it?" Liam walked over to the bar and poured himself a drink, despite it being barely past 9 in the morning. "We play the game," he said simply. Elena folded her arms. "And by that, you mean?" Liam took a slow sip, watching her over the rim of his glass. "We give them something to talk about, but this time we control the narrative." She frowned. "You want us to pretend to be a happy couple? I want us to be convincing." Elena let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," Liam countered. "We go out together, we hold hands, we smile. We act like two people who are at least attempting to build a life together." Elena hesitated, because the way Liam said it, so matter of fact, so calculated, it made her feel like she was walking into a trap. She wasn't naive. She knew how the media worked. Once they started playing this game, there would be no turning back. And yet, she couldn't deny the small, twisted part of her that was intrigued by the challenge. Liam watched her, his expression unreadable. "Unless, of course, you'd rather let them tear us apart before this marriage even has a chance to be beneficial to either of us." Elena's fingers curled into fists at her sides. She hated that he was right. She hated that he knew it too. Finally, she sighed. Fine, we'll play your little game. Liam's lips twitched slightly. I knew you'd see reason. But, Elena added, stepping closer, if we're going to do this, we do it on my terms. Liam arched a brow. Oh? She lifted her chin. No staged kisses, no over-the-top declarations of love. We keep it subtle, just enough to make people doubt their assumptions, but not enough to make me feel like a puppet in one of your boardroom negotiations. Liam considered her for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. For the first time since their wedding, Elena felt something strange pass between them. Not hatred, not indifference. Something else. Something that felt dangerously close to understanding. Later that evening, Elena stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the delicate diamond bracelet around her wrist. Tonight was their first public appearance as a married couple. An exclusive charity gala, packed with society's elite, where they would be watched, judged, and analyzed from every possible angle. She exhaled slowly, smoothing her hands down the fabric of her gown. It was deep crimson, bold, striking, impossible to ignore. If she was going to play this role, she was going to do it on her terms. A knock at the door made her turn. Liam stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over her before he spoke. You look... He hesitated. Elena smirked. Careful, Liam. You almost sounded like a husband just now. Liam chuckled, but there was something unreadable in his expression. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Liam extended his hand. Elena eyed it warily. Are we starting the act already? Liam's smirk softened into something almost genuine. Come on, Elena. Let's give them a love story they'll never forget. She hesitated only a second longer before slipping her hand into his. His grip was warm, steady, and for the first time since this marriage had begun, Elena wondered if pretending might become something dangerously real. The gala was a perfect illusion. Crystal chandeliers draped the ceiling in golden light. The hum of conversation swirled around them, and champagne glasses clinked in celebration. Liam Kensington had attended hundreds of these events, but tonight felt different, and it had everything to do with the woman beside him. Elena stood at his side, her posture poised, her crimson gown hugging her frame like it had been crafted for this very moment. The deep color made her skin glow, and the confidence in her gaze was undeniable. She looked like she belonged in this world, but more than that, she looked like she belonged with him, which was dangerous. Because Liam knew this marriage was nothing more than a performance. So why did it feel so damn real? He wasn't the only one noticing it either. The whispers had already started. Look at them. So different from the wedding. Do you think it's real? Maybe they actually like each other. If it's an act, it's a damn good one. Elena must have heard it too, because she leaned in, her lips barely brushing his ear. Congratulations, she murmured, amusement dancing in her voice. I think we're fooling them. Liam smirked, but the warmth of her breath against his skin sent a shiver down his spine. Of course we are, he replied smoothly. You're an excellent actress. Elena pulled back slightly, tilting her head. And you? Liam held her gaze. I never lose at my own game. She studied him for a moment, something unreadable flickering in her expression. Then she smiled, a real one. And Liam felt something shift inside him, a dangerous realization. He wasn't sure when it had started. Maybe it was that first night when she had stood her ground against him. Maybe it was the way she never backed down from his challenges. Maybe it was the way she had become the first person in years who actually saw through his mask. But whatever it was, Liam knew he was in trouble, because this marriage had started as a transaction. But now it was becoming something else entirely. And Liam Kensington, who had spent his entire life in control, was finally starting to lose his grip. The evening was going smoothly, too smoothly. Elena played the role of the perfect wife, laughing at the right moments, touching his arm just enough times to make it look natural. But Liam was starting to hate how effortless it felt, because it wasn't supposed to feel this easy. And yet, every time she looked at him, really looked at him, he felt like she was seeing something no one else had ever tried to understand. Then, it happened. A familiar voice broke through the crowd. "Liam!" Liam stiffened. Elena felt it immediately. She followed his gaze, and her expression hardened. There, standing with a sickeningly sweet smile, was Vivienne Carter, Liam's ex-fiancée, the woman who had left him humiliated, walking away from their engagement and selling their breakup story to the press. Vivienne stepped closer, eyes gleaming with malicious curiosity. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." Liam clenched his jaw. "Wishful thinking." Vivienne laughed, like they were sharing some inside joke. And this must be the new Mrs. Kensington. Elena didn't flinch. She simply extended her hand, her expression cool and controlled. "Elena Kensington." Vivienne eyed her up and down before shaking her hand. "I must say, I was surprised when I heard about your wedding," Vivienne mused, her gaze flickering between them. "It happened so suddenly, almost like it was a business deal." Liam felt Elena stiffen slightly beside him. Vivienne smirked. "But of course, that's ridiculous. You two look very much in love." Her voice dripped with sarcasm, and Liam hated that Vivienne still thought she could get under his skin. But before he could say anything, Elena moved closer to him. She turned to face Vivienne, then, without warning, slipped her hand into Liam's and interlaced their fingers. Liam's heart slammed against his ribs. He barely had time to react before Elena leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a long kiss. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Enough for Liam to feel the warmth of her lips, enough for him to inhale the faint, intoxicating scent of her perfume, enough for him to forget, just for a second, that this was all pretend. When Elena pulled away, she smiled sweetly at Vivienne. "Do you still think it's a business deal?" she asked, her voice laced with challenge. Vivienne's smile faltered. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Liam could have laughed at the sight of it. Instead, he tightened his grip on Elena's hand and smirked. "Run along, Vivienne," he said smoothly. "We have a honeymoon to enjoy." Vivienne's face turned red. She opened her mouth, probably to throw another insult, but then thought better of it. With one last glare, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Liam exhaled slowly, loosening his tie. "Well, that was—" But before he could finish, Elena turned to face him, and he knew that something had just changed between them, because that kiss hadn't been part of the plan, and yet she had done it without hesitation. Elena swallowed, her eyes searching his face. "Liam," she murmured. His pulse pounded. Something electric hung in the air between them, undeniable, unspoken. Then, before he could stop himself, Liam reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It was such a simple gesture, and yet it felt more intimate than anything they had done so far. Elena sucked in a breath. "Why did you do that?" Liam asked, his voice lower than he intended. Elena didn't look away. "Because I wanted to." Liam's heart stopped, because suddenly he wasn't sure where the act ended and the truth began. He had spent his entire life avoiding vulnerability. But now, standing here, staring at the woman he had been forced to marry, Liam realized something terrifying. He wasn't playing a game anymore. He was already falling, and there was no way out.